Before we begin, in 2019, YouTube was caught data mining children under the age of 13, violating the Child's Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA. Since settling, YouTube has enacted new policies meant to dodge responsibility and scapegoat creators. This video is not made for kids. It is not targeted at kids. It is not advertising to kids. Parental discretion is advised. Hey guys, how's everyone doing? This is the Sentinel watching over Geekdom, and welcome back to Sentinel Vlogs. Yes, we're doing a vlog again. I know it's been a while, but I thought I'd do something fun to pass the time in these trying times. So I thought I'd talk about some of my favorite musicals. Now, I'm really big into theater. I'm really big into musical theater. It's not something I get the opportunity to talk about a lot, so I thought I'd just take the time and talk about some of the shows I love. In particular, what I'm going to be talking about are some of my favorite recordings of shows. Specifically, just to explain, because the title does not do a good job of explaining it, because there are so many words, I'm going to be looking at shows that, over the course of their existence, have acquired multiple recordings. An original cast, either London or Broadway, and then a cast from when that show was transplanted from one to the other, so from London to Broadway or from Broadway to London, revivals, concept albums, etc., etc. I'm going to be looking at some of these shows and discussing which albums, which recordings are my personal favorites. Now, everything, as always, everything presented is just my personal opinion. If you like a show and you like a different recording, that's perfectly alright. That's perfectly valid. If you disagree with me, that's alright. You're valid. And please start a conversation in the comments. I love conversation and healthy debate. So there's really nothing else to say. Without further ado, let's just jump in and get started. And before we get into the list proper, I'm going to start with one honorable mention. The only reason this is an honorable mention is because, one, I haven't heard as many recordings of this particular show, and two, there's just not enough for me to talk about to make it a full entry on this list. Hello, Dolly. What I think might be Jerry Herman's most popular musical. Like I said, I've heard a few recordings of this, mainly the film recording, and the rest I've heard bits and pieces of. I've heard bits of the Pearl Bailey production, the Pearl Bailey Cab Calloway production, and one of the Carol Channing productions. I don't know if it was the original or one of the revivals. But my favorite, actually, is the one that gets slept on a lot. The one that seems to get the most negative feedback. The 2017 revival recording starring Bette Midler and David Hyde Pierce. Most of this is biased because I am a massive Bette Midler fan, and that revival is what finally got me interested enough to check out the show, but I really do love this recording. I love the vocals, I love the performances, and I love the arrangement. All around, I love it. Like I said, there's not enough for me to talk about to do a full entry. Now let's get into the list proper. There are 7 shows, 7 recordings I'm going to be talking about. And I'm not going to be presenting them in any particular order. This is not a ranking, although I will end with my favorite musicals. So starting us off is Les Miserables. You know, really, when I sort of had my musical awakening, it was one of the first shows I saw, and to this day, it remains somewhere in my top 10 favorite shows of all time. And my favorite album, my favorite recording of Les Miserables, the 1995 10th anniversary concert, also called the Dreamcast. And as much as possible, I'll probably fail, I'm going to try and dissociate the recording from the production itself, because I am really just talking about the recordings. And that's especially prevalent here because I'm going to blaspheme a little bit. I'm not a big fan of the 10th anniversary concert. I know it's considered one of the greatest productions of Les Mis ever, but it's just My personal favorite is, can I get it from here? Nope. My personal favorite is the 25th anniversary concert. Yes, I know, we've all heard it. Nick Jonas is horribly miscast as Marius, but I feel everything else about that particular production hits so hard and hits so good that I'm very easily able to overlook that. The problem is there is no recording for the 25th anniversary concert. And I do like the 10th anniversary. I like the song still, but my issue is it's sort of an abridged production. A lot of those little transitional numbers are cut out. Like, the big one is The Robbery, that I'm remembering off the top of my head. Dog Eat Dog, one of Thénardier's songs, is cut out. And a lot of this, and some of the songs that do remain, they are abridged. They are cut down. For example, Wedding Chorale. It's, Marius and Cosette's wedding. After Wedding Chorale, there's this little number where Thénardier shows up and has this confrontation where he tries to blackmail Marius about Valjean, which then leads into Beggar at the Feast. In the 10th anniversary concert, after Wedding Chorale, the concert goes right into Beggar at the Feast. So, but still, for what it is, it's a really good production, and the cast is amazing. You've got the original Jean Valjean, Colm Wilkinson, the original Marius, Michael Ball, the original Thénardier, Alan Armstrong, and several casting choices, which to this day are considered some of the best casting choices for this show. Philip Quast as Javert, Ruthie Henshaw as Fantine, Lea Salonga as Eponine. I have to agree. And this recording, I think, is the best version of the show. Despite my minor, really nitpick about it being abridged. And next up, one I'm probably gonna muddle and ramble through because putting together this list and figuring everything out, this was the hardest one for me to figure out. Jesus Christ Superstar. My favorite Andrew Lloyd Webber musical. And I may have to turn in my theater nerd card because it's the only Andrew Lloyd Webber musical I like. I'm sorry, I know. I've tried so many times to try and watch Phantom, and I just cannot get into it. And don't worry, it wasn't the Joel Schumacher movie I tried to watch. But yeah, I've tried a couple Andrew Lloyd Webber shows. Phantom, Cats, Evita, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Was that? Yeah, that was right. But yeah, so far, Jesus Christ Superstar has been the only one I've liked. And and this is the hardest one to talk about because many of the albums, many of the recordings that I've listed, I feel are close to perfect. With Jesus Christ Superstar, I'm not that confident in my picks because each album has some admittedly very minor nitpicks. But my favorite recording of Jesus Christ Superstar is the original 1970 concept album. Like I said, this is a show I mostly like, and most of the recordings, except the 2000 film, not a fan, are really good. Very minor issues in each one, like the 1973 film. Not a fan of Joshua Mostel as Herod, or the NBC live concert. John Legend tries so hard, but Jesus is way outside of his vocal range. And it's the same thing here. With the concept album, I'm not the biggest fan of this Caiaphas. In fact, actually, now that I think about it, he kind of sounds like Maurice LaMarche. But the only difference too between the concept album and the stage show and the films is that the concept album does not have Could We Start Again, Please? Which I'm fine with. In my opinion, it's just kind of a very number. But I really like the performances here, especially from, what's his name? I want to say Ian Gillan. Hang on, I do not have it open in front of me, so I can't correct myself. I like Mike Diabo, Barry Dennen. I think I actually like him as Pilate here more than I liked him in the movie. Although he is still great. If you watch any of the performances where he plays Pilot, because he's played it a few times, he was always great. And yeah, really nothing more to say. A lot of this is just going to boil down to me saying multiple different variations of "it's really good," because I don't really have any kind of training in music. So yeah, a guy who doesn't know much about music talking about music, this is going to go over well. Alright, next up, if this was a ranking, this would be number 3, but this is not a ranking, so Once on This Island. Originally, this was going to be an honorable mention with Hello Dolly, but as I sat down and thought about it, I actually realized I had a lot to say. Not as many recordings, available as some of the other shows on this list. There's only 2, but my favorite is the 2019 Broadway revival. Now, Once on This Island, it constantly, like Les Mis, it constantly moves spots in my ranking, but it does rank as one of my favorite musicals of all time, ever since I was in this show in middle school. And if you're unfamiliar with Once on This Island, it's sort of a Caribbean take on The Little Mermaid. The original Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale with the tragic ending, not the Disney movie. And it's about a girl named Timoon a peasant girl who falls in love with a rich young man, essentially a prince. And she's put on a journey to be with him that essentially pits the power of love against the power of death. It's a really great show, and one of the things I really like about the revival soundtrack is the use of the ensemble, the use of the chorus, because throughout the song, they provide a lot of backing vocals, which, how to explain this properly? They lend their voices to being part of the orchestration, of being part of the arrangement, the accompaniment, which gives the songs an entirely different feel, and it provides an entirely different tone and mood. And personally, compared to the original Broadway cast, it's much more immersive. Like, one of my recommendations would be on YouTube to check out actually all 4 of the God songs for this. The Human Heart, Mama Will Provide, Forever Yours, or its reprise, and my favorite song in the entire show, Rain. Yeah, there's really nothing more to say on it. Also, the audio quality is better. Granted, I listened to the original Broadway recording on YouTube. I don't actually own it like I do the revival. But yeah, the overall quality of the revival recording is much better as well. Alright, next up, Gypsy. One of 2 Stephen Sondheim musicals I have on this list. Technically, it's funny, Gypsy is considered a Stephen Sondheim musical, although it's not one he had as big a role in as some of his later works that he's known for, like Sweeney Todd, or Sunday in the Park with George, or, all these other ones he did. But because someone else, I really should have done research and taken notes before I did this video, but oh well. Someone else was doing the book and music for Gypsy. Originally, the person writing the book wanted Sondheim to do the music and lyrics. However, the show was being written with Ethel Merman in mind, and Ethel Merman basically said, "I'm sorry, this Sondheim guy is an unknown. I recently worked with an unknown, and he screwed me over. I don't want to do that again. Get me someone with way more notoriety." And so they brought someone in else to write the music, and Sondheim just ended up writing the lyrics. Although it's funny, even though he just did the lyrics, this really does feel like a Sondheim show. Anyway, and actually I think with Les Mis, Gypsy might have the most recordings of any other musical on this, more recordings than any other musical on this list. And my favorite is the 2015 London revival, starring Imelda Staunton, Lara Pulver, and Peter Davison. This might be a little bit biased because when I finally decided to watch Gypsy, the 2015 revival was the first one I watched. And, and then I watched the 1993 film with Bette Midler. I should have just done that between takes. But I really enjoyed the 2015 revival. I love the accompaniment of it. I love the orchestrations. I love the performances, especially Imelda Staunton. She is honestly the most vicious Mama Rose I think we've ever seen. And it's just one of my favorite performances because it's so brutal. And also along those lines, Laura Pulver is my favorite Louise. It's just one of the things I really like about Gypsy that I've seen watching various productions and two of the movies, or the movie and one of the recordings, is that even though there are beats the characters have to hit, the roles are written with such freedom that really the actors can play them any way they want. Like, there is a wide variety of how people play Mama Rose, and sort of the same as Louise. But of course, much like the actors have their own way of viewing a role, the audience does as well. And I view Louise as being really innocent, almost naive in a way. And I really think Pulver nails that innocence until you get to Let Me Entertain You, which her rendition of is one of my favorites. I love so many of the renditions of these songs. Some People is really good. Let Me Entertain You, as I mentioned. You Gotta Have a Gimmick is absolutely hysterical. And Rose's Turn is just... Imelda Staunton's rendition is just utterly gut-wrenching. And, once again, I just love everything about this cast, this soundtrack, and this score. Alright, 3 left I want to talk about. Next up, La Cage aux Folles. I already mentioned Jerry Herman a little bit with Hello Dolly. La Cage aux Folles is my favorite Jerry Herman musical. And my favorite recording, let me make sure I get the year right because I have my notes in front of me, the 2010 Broadway revival, starring Kelsey Grammer and Douglas Hodge. First of all, in this recording itself, you can hear why Douglas Hodge won the Tony for this performance. It is stellar. It is so energetic and vibrant and glorious and heartbreaking. He hits the notes, both musically and in terms of character, so wonderfully. And, Kelsey Grammer is also good. I've always been a fan of Kelsey Grammer. And furthermore, one of the complaints I see about Jerry Herman musicals is that they all sound the same. I can kind of see where you're coming from, but I do feel I have to disagree about that. One thing I will say, though, is that the arrangement of the revival of La Cage is certainly really helps this particular production stand out, because rather in sort of that big old-style musical that Herman kind of wrote a lot, from Mame to Hello Dolly, the revival, the orchestration of the revival does its best to make it sound like a nightclub, like that kind of more smaller, intimate nightclub type score, which is also really enjoyable. And also, one other thing I want to bring up, I mentioned this a little bit with Once on This Island. Wow, I just blanked for a second there. The audio quality of the revival soundtrack is so much better than the original Broadway cast recording. And that's not to bash the original Broadway recording. That one's also good. The orchestrations, the performances, especially George Hearn. But the overall audio quality is very subpar in that recording. The volume is inconsistent, and it's mostly on the quiet side. I don't know if that's just my phone's settings But yeah, the revival recording has much better audio on it. It's easier to listen to. You don't have to crank up the volume to max just to be able to hear it. Most of these recordings are great. La Cage is pretty much the only one where I have to say, yeah, but the sound quality of one is what makes it the better recording, is what makes me prefer it more. Alright, 2 left. For the penultimate musical I'll be talking about, when I talked about Gypsy, I mentioned that this list would have 2 Stephen Sondheim musicals. The other one, Into the Woods. This is my favorite Stephen Sondheim musical. Full stop. I love everything about this show, from its story to its characters to its songs to its... Oh, what was I just gonna say? To its messages. And my favorite recording of Into the Woods? I'm gonna be controversial here. My favorite recording of Into the Woods is the 2014 film. Now, real quick, I just want to ghost over this. There are 2 soundtracks for the Into the Woods film. There is a 2-disc complete soundtrack, which features all the big numbers, some of the smaller numbers, like Cinderella at her mother's grave, or Careful My Toe, when the stepsisters are trying on Cinderella's slipper, and a lot of the just musical orchestration pieces, And then there is just the highlights soundtrack, which is the big, which is all the big performance numbers. The opening, Hello Little Girl, The Last Midnight, what have you. I own the complete soundtrack, but really either one is great. Yeah, I really think Into the Woods surprised a lot of people. Like, when it was announced and the trailers first came out, I think a lot of people were really skeptic because Disney was the one doing it. And people were really concerned that a lot of the darker subtext, a lot of the darker moments of this show would be taken out. And people were pleasantly surprised that Into the Woods as a film remained as intact as it did. In fact, I would even go so far as to say, for my own money, Into the Woods is the best film adaptation of a Sondheim musical. I really think the only one that comes close, and objectively might be better, is the 1993 film version of Gypsy, starring Bette Midler. And I do have some issues with, and I do have one big issue with Into the Woods. Or actually, before I get there, I do want to say, and I think the adaptation from stage to screen is handled well. The elements that could only work on stage, I think are written out and changed well enough, and I think the changes they had to make for time were handled well, like cutting out the subplot about the princes being dicks, mostly, or changing Rapunzel's subplot. I actually think Rapunzel's subplot works better in the movie than it does on stage. Really, my only complaint with the film version is that No More is not in the movie, which I understand, given that they really didn't do anything with the baker's father. He wasn't as prominent a role as he was in the original show. Partially because I think it might have been one of those things harder to pull off. But on the other hand, No More is one of my favorite songs in the show. Not my absolute favorite. That would be The Last Midnight. And, this movie does it spectacularly. But just everything about the movie version of Into the Woods, I just love. This is probably one of James Corden's best performances as an actor. Emily Blunt is my favorite baker's wife. Meryl Streep is really good as the witch. Jack and Red Riding Hood are really good. Anna Kendrick. Who knew Chris Pine could sing? Because I didn't. I could gush about this movie for hours. I understand it's not perfect, and I understand some people don't like it. That's fine. But I really, really love the movie. And I really love the soundtrack. And just... I'm going to keep gushing about this, so... Let me cut away and gush about it some more, and then we'll come back and talk about the last one. Alright, and there's one left to talk about. As I mentioned, even though there is no ranking, this last one is my favorite musical. Hairspray. Now, Hairspray is my favorite musical mainly for personal reasons. Partly out of nostalgia, partly out of this is what came out when I sort of had my awakening, so to speak, Like I said, I didn't start getting into musicals until middle school, specifically, because I can really remember it, in around 8th grade. And do you know what was coming out in 8th grade? The film version of Hairspray. Do you know what was coming out when I was in 8th grade? And I've loved, and just Hairspray was what started me on my journey. In fact, of the dream roles I hope to play on stage at some point, Edna Turnblad is at the top of that list. And I own every version of the Hairspray soundtrack. I have the original Broadway cast soundtrack. I have the movie soundtrack. Actually, there was also a 2-disc special edition version of the movie soundtrack that I don't have, so that was quite a lie. And what is my favorite recording for Hairspray? The 2016 NBC Hairspray Live telecast. Again, first of all, the orchestrations are great. It's very big. It's a very big orchestra, that's what I want to say, compared to the original Broadway cast, where that orchestra is not, I don't want to say small because it's not, but it's not as big as the film or Hairspray Live. And the cast is just phenomenal, especially Kristen Chenoweth as Velma Von Tussle, who just, spoilers, I love Kristen Chenoweth. Jennifer Hudson, once again, just blew it out of the water. And I remember being really surprised by that because I was very cautious about Jennifer Hudson. Not because I didn't think she could do it. I'm sure she could, but it's because as soon as I heard she was in it, I thought she was too young to be Motormouth Maybelle. But of course, and given the context, wow, I can't believe I forgot that word. And given the context of Big Blonde and Beautiful, I thought Hudson was too petite. But of course, it was amazing. Harvey Fierstein, the original Edna Turnblad, is once again really great. Martin Short is good. The whole cast is great. I don't mind the Big Dollhouse being cut. It's a fun Act 2 opener, but that's exactly what it is. It's an Act 2 opener. It's not really anything else. And if I'm being honest, the whole Tracy and prison subplot is kind of goofy, even by Hairspray standards. Hairspray is looking at something that was very real, but it's a very lighthearted look at it. And even by its own standards, the way Tracy is broken out of prison in the stage show is just goofy. But yeah, so many of these songs are wonderfully performed. It's one of the few times I've found Ariana Grande bearable. There's nothing more to say to that. I thought I had something to say, but I didn't. And, once again, it just boils down to, I just love everything about this soundtrack. And given the context, wow, I can't believe I forgot that word. And given the context of Big Blonde and Beautiful, I thought Hudson was too petite. But of course, it was amazing. Harvey Fierstein, the original Edna Turnblad, is once again really great. Martin Short is good. The whole cast is great. I don't mind the Big Dollhouse being cut. It's a fun Act 2 opener, but that's exactly what it is. It's an Act 2 opener. It's not really anything else. And if I'm being honest, the whole Tracy and prison subplot is kind of goofy, even by Hairspray standards. Hairspray is looking at something that was very real, but it's a very lighthearted look at it. And even by its own standards, the way Tracy is broken out of prison in the stage show is just goofy. But yeah, so many of these songs are wonderfully performed. It's one of the few times I've found Ariana Grande bearable. There's nothing more to say to that. I thought I had something to say, but I didn't. And, once again, it just boils down to, I just love everything about this soundtrack. Alright, there you had it. Some of my favorite musical recordings. What about you? Were there any in my list that you liked? Were there recordings of those shows you liked more? Please start a conversation in the comments below. And as always, like, comment, subscribe. Click the bell next to subscribe to get notifications when I upload. Share the video around. All of it helps my channel grow. In the description box below, you'll find the link to my Ko-fi, where you can support me in the channel, and you'll find the link to my Twitter, where you can follow me and get updates on the channel. This is the Sentinel, watching over Geekdom, and I'll see you guys next time.